So what are macro shortcuts and what's their use? Macro shortcuts are a little known, perhaps underappreciated function within PowerScribe where you can call a macro or a template without having to use the voice command. So the typical way to call a macro would be to do something like this. Macro X-ray chest, right? And that populates the macro of interest. Another way is to use the macro shortcut, which is a string of characters, right? So I type the associated string, press enter, and the macro comes up. And I've got macro shortcuts associated with the vast majority of my templates. You can see here some bone ones for bones, CT head, CT abdomen pelvis, CT APE, basically, everything, MR brain, like anything you would want to pull up commonly. And then I have them for, briefer macros that are just phrases or a couple lines. And so how do you do that? So in the auto text editor, here we go. For any given macro, so let's see, this is my chest x-ray macro. The shortcut is this line here. Okay, so that's the string you have to type. And the shortcut has to be at least two kind of keystrokes or two characters long. So it can't just be one. And for example, let's add one to a macro that we don't currently have. So I recently made a macro called MR post-operative, in which, this is referenced in my teaching video on how to create a macro from scratch, the basics. This does not yet have a shortcut. So let's just make a shortcut for this one, MRPP, let's say, and then we can save that. So then this is the macro we're going to pull up. So that if we just type this out, MRPP, it'll bring that macro in. All right. And so this function is useful to basically have an alternative means to quickly pull in macros. Like if your system has lag between your reporting and when it returns text, if you're having internet connectivity issues, if your system is just a little inconsistent, this can help smooth out some of the bumps because it's just a little faster. And another thing is that you can use it to quickly input things that you do all the time. So in our system, we have this line, you can see it here, at the bottom of each of our reports that allows us to categorize the acuity of the clinical finding, right? Or the findings of the report or the study. And there's a number of templates in my system that lack this last line. And we basically need it. And if I send a report that doesn't have it, I get a pop-up and then, it slows down the whole workflow. And so trainees will use some of these templates sometimes and send them to me, and then I have to put them in. And instead of populating using a voice command like macro acuity, right? What I'll do is, let's just do this. What I'll do is that I'll just use the shortcut, which is this string. And it just happens to be the two keys to the left of the enter key and then the enter key. So it has to be at least two characters long. And it just allows me to very quickly, because I might do this a dozen times a day, just creating that like easily accessible shortcut allows me to just hit those three keys, put in that line, and then just sign the report without getting like a slowdown in the work. There are a number of other things that I will use this for. Like for example, let's just say I'm trying to replace, let's just say, a very long impression with something that, I just want to say that it's negative. There's nothing acute. I can just use this one, acute findings. I've used this to input like things like mild, moderate, severe, or if I'm grading spinal canal stenosis, I've got like mild, moderate, and this is compatible with like formatting of some of my spine imaging templates. And one other function, aside from pulling in templates or pulling in shorter macros, is to integrate the PowerScribe shortcuts with automation tools. So I have AutoHotkey. When I'm working remotely, I will use AutoHotkey to perform a series of actions, right? So like, let's just say I pull up a study. I have a script that allows AutoHotkey to, go into PowerScribe, replace any default template with my preferred template. And how it does that is it kind of like selects the text, it reads the exam title, and then it like refers to an inbuilt library, and then it types out the shortcut to my preferred text. And so it automatically puts in the template I want. And then there's a series of other steps that that I have AutoHotkey do. It navigates PACS, it navigates my EHR, it brings up the prior report, it does a number of things, right? But that particular part where it's going to put in the template I want references or rather uses the shortcut functionality. So that's kind of one other application. And so this is a not well appreciated sort of functionality. It has some fairly niche uses, but for the right person, the right circumstance, if you've already built a lot of efficiency oriented tools, a lot of workflow smoothing tools, this can provide access to further potentially untapped improvements in your process. All right, I hope you learned something.